Well, welcome to The Perspective. I'm Lorie Hartshorn, a friend of The Perspective, and I'm sitting in for Mike all this week, taking over his show. So I'm really glad that you're with us this week. We're going on an amazing journey to gain a greater perspective on how we can be the person God created us to be. And to do that, we're joined by Dr. Mary Lynn, clinical psychologist, counselor, speaker, and podcaster. And yesterday we discussed what it means to be your authentic self and learned about our shadow self. Now, if you missed it, I encourage you to go back and watch that episode on our YouTube channel because you want to learn all about that shadow self. And today we're going to continue discussing being our authentic selves or the person God designed us to be. You may be wondering, why do you do what you do? I ask that question, I think, every other day. And I know that we can all do better, right? But often, even if we know better, here's the thing, we don't always do better. And why is that? Well, to help answer this question, we welcome back Dr. Mary Lynn. Thanks for being with us, Mary.
So glad to be back. And I can't wait to dig in.
Oh, well, I
I'm
can't
a
either because
science geek and I love this stuff.
Right? And
Yes.
I really want it. Why do I do what I do, Mary?
Well, can I have a private session with you, Laura?
Yeah, for sure. I love your book, Rebecoming.
Thank you.
It's becoming a guide, even in my own life, as I've read it and now I'm going back over these, can I say the key chapters that I'm like, I got to do some work on? But some might have not watched yesterday. And I think it's very important to unpack the difference between your essential, God-given essential self and your shadow self. Because if you can just briefly explain what's the difference there, why do we need to know that?
Yeah, I believe that God has created us with an essential self that reflects his image in our own unique way. So different from you and me. I'll have my own calling and purpose, but it is to reflect his glory. So that's our essential self. But our shadow self comes into play when we don't know who we are and we experience the ups and downs of life. And as part of coping, we develop these strategies to hide or to pretend or to perform because we're trying to gain approval or acceptance or love.
Right.
And so the whole concept is to unbecome that so that we can re-become the true self that God already implanted in us before the beginning of time. So that's sort of the core message of it.
Good. It's so good because all this we're going to talk about, okay, well, what are those things that we're in a sense hiding behind and not actually free to be ourselves? And in your book, you've written it, like I said, like a roadmap. I love it. And I love how at the end of each chapter, you give people, digging deeper.
Yes.
And questions to work through. And I'm personally finding that really helpful because I can read something and go, that's great. But what does that mean to me in my life?
Yes.
But life happens. We're trying to grow and become more of that person. But the trauma, maybe mistreatment, maybe abuse, happens in our life.
Yes.
And our rational brain, we can know something, but it gets hijacked, you say.
Yes.
Right? It gets hijacked by this emotional response. Like we know better, but then we behave poorly, right?
Yes.
So help us understand what you call our survival instinct and how our brain works when you can know better, but not do better.
Yes. And part of the reason why I'm such a science geek is I love getting into how God has wired us because true science is biblical. He has made us very complex beings, but then we also have a lot of similarities. And so at core, we have this desire to survive. I mean, we do.
Yeah.
And so in our desire to survive, we can go into self-preservation. We also need to be in relationship with others. Connection is very important. All of these things that we need to survive. But in that also, we have these, you started off by saying in our rational mind, et cetera, et cetera. Well,
do we have a rational mind?
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are all emotional beings. In fact, 100% of everything that happens, all the data that goes to our brains, through our brains, goes to the emotional part of your brain first.
Wow.
And it's always being filtered for what could possibly be a risk or danger to my survival. And in today's world, we might not think of survival as in the tiger that might eat us. It's more risk to our reputation, risk to my relationship, to my job, my security, things like that. And when that gets triggered, the common response is fear.
Right.
Or insecurity, or it could be shame as well. So these primary emotions, what I call hot emotions, they happen instantaneously, so fast that our rational mind can't even keep up with it. And so, yes, often what happens is we overreact and then we can look back and go, oh, shoot, I didn't mean to do that. I
Right.
didn't mean to. Or we might go, well, I said it because it was their fault and we don't take responsibility for it. But
Mm,
part of in growth is recognizing how we do have these tendencies
mm.
to go into self-protection mode. And if we can understand that, and we can
Yeah.
understand that it's actually fear that's been triggered or shame that's been triggered, we can then do something about it.
Yeah.
Because the challenge with these hot emotions, they take forefront of our mind is that what we call the cooler emotions, like joy and compassion and love. They aren't as vital to our survival, so they tend to take a back seat. And so
Interesting.
then we go into react mode, we can say and do hurtful things, even to ourselves,
Huh.
and then we lose sight of our need to love others and to be
Yeah.
compassionate with what's going on with them.
Well, I mean, if I was walking in the woods, which I love to do,
Yeah.
and I thought I was being, threatened
Mm.
by a bear or
Yes.
whatever, true story, coming my way, I'm going to go into self-preservation. My
Yeah.
instincts are going to
Yeah.
kick in. And you're
Yeah.
saying that's kind of what it's like
That's what it is
when
throughout
you
your life.
feel threatened.
Yes. And we feel threatened a lot more than people realize.
Mm,
People feel fear all the time. In fact, a lot of people deny they feel fear
yeah. We shove
or
it down.
shame. They shove it down because the emotions of fear and shame are not comfortable emotions. It makes us feel vulnerable. And
Wow.
then vulnerable for a lot of people means weak, which
Right.
it's not. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
And so we do everything possible to kind of hide from those emotions. But the problem with when we're not in touch with our emotions is they actually do control us. We just don't have any awareness to be able to do something different or do better. That's the challenge.
Okay. So this is what I'm hearing you say.
Mm,
Your everything comes through your emotions. You can't just shove them down, shut them off, ignore them.
right.
Like really in many ways we've been taught.
Yes.
Like
I know.
don't be a crybaby
I
was
know.
actually something
Yes.
my older brother said to me all the time. And I decided, I think at age 7, I'd never cry again.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that bizarre? And I don't think I did cry for years.
Yeah. I
I
know.
just decided I felt threatened. I went into self-preservation
That's
mode
right.
because when
That's
your
right.
brothers say you're a crybaby.
Well, he was shaming you
Yeah,
for a natural human response
right.
is when you're hurt or sad, you're going to cry.
Yeah,
So then we learn to shut that down. And so
right.
we lose touch of the things that actually trigger us into survival mode. And so, survivor mode, we can fight, we can flee, we can freeze, we can
Mm,
fawn. And fawn is a newer term for people who might not have heard of it, which is we bend over backwards to please people, to kind of try to get back in right standing with
mm,
them. And unfortunately, people who fawn historically can often have a history of being abused. So they
okay.
allow people to have unrighteous power over their lives.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can see with all of that, yes, it's good
Yeah,
that we should flee certain situations, but it can also lead us to leaving conflicts we should resolve.
right.
It can cause us to get angry and fight back and hurt somebody.
Yeah,
It can cause us to freeze so that we get stuck in dysfunctional situations,
right.
or we can fawn in a way that allows people power over us in a way that's not good for us.
Right. So our emotions are really important.
They are. They're important to acknowledge,
Yeah.
and you can only manage them and do better if you acknowledge them and kind of go, okay, this is how I feel. And sometimes I might need time to back away and just process how I
Yeah.
feel. Not always good real time recognizing how I feel. It's only afterwards I'm like, oh, shoot,
Sure.
I should have said
I
this.
can
I should have
relate to
said
that. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But the more times you practice being aware of how you feel, the more times you have that insight, that self awareness
Yeah.
of what's driving you, of why you do what you do, so
Yeah.
that you can kind of go, you know what, I might be feeling afraid right now because we've just had a fight or
Right.
conflict,
Yeah.
but I'm going to be courageous and I'm going to speak up and I'm going to try to resolve it because I love you and I want to restore our relationship. So by doing that, instead of retreating, I've now moved into a better response with a better outcome.
I think that's so good because I was kind of raised in a generation that was ignore your emotions.
Mm.
Am I generalizing?
Oh, me too.
Right. And now, is there kind of a now almost, I don't know. Now it's like everything is follow how you feel. Like,
Right,
is that
right.
too harsh to say? Or
Well, there is
there's a
that.
health in there
There's a
somewhere?
health in there somewhere. I think it's okay to be emotionally expressive.
Yeah.
But I think if it comes at expense of other people, I'm just saying my truth.
Yeah.
And then you say things that are hurtful,
Yeah.
that's not really loving, and that's
Yeah.
not really what I mean.
Yeah.
So being aware of our emotions doesn't mean we give full rein, because
Right.
it is true. There's going to be times where we're upset or frustrated, and we have negative biases that can filter the way we interpret what's happened,
Yeah.
and it may not be accurate. So our emotions aren't always accurate
Right.
about what's really happening out there, but what it can give us is insight about what's happening inside of me.
Yeah, it's
And then,
good.
so I had a fight not too long ago with my husband, and as I was working through my emotions, I realized, oh, he's triggered those feelings that I used to feel when my mom would criticize me when I was a little girl. So
Right.
it wasn't him. So if I got defensive, it would have just created more of a situation. But I was able to say, you know what? I just realized I'm starting to feel those emotions that I felt when my mom used to criticize me as a kid. And he stopped and he went, oh, well, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
And the whole fight just went,
So good. Well,
Mhm.
we're going to come right back. We're going to learn more about your emotions, why you shouldn't ignore them, how they inform you, and we're going to talk more about fear. See you in a minute. Well, welcome back. Wow, what a topic today. Our emotions, our brains get hijacked, fear, all the stuff. And on the topic of emotions like fear, we're asking the question, why do we do what we do? So, Dr. Mary,
Mm,
back in the chair here.
yes.
We have this master emotion, you say, of shame.
Yes.
Wow. And it
Yes.
can hijack us, I guess is the word. It can stop us in our tracks, right?
Mhm.
What kind of power does shame hold over us?
Oh, it's huge. Shame, would say, comes into our life at a very early age. It's the emotion we feel when we get corrected by our parent. And so as a kid, we don't know that they're just saying, please stop doing that behavior. We think instead we're bad. And so shame makes us feel that there's something intrinsically wrong with us. And shame also, interestingly enough, from a science standpoint, it triggers in the pain center of our brain. So
Wow.
we'll do everything possible to avoid feeling shame. But shame is a master emotion because when we're not aware of it, it's so hidden that most people don't know that they feel shame, but they may act shamey. So, as an example, if a leader feels disrespected and therefore decides that he or she is going to like fire a bunch of people, that's not necessarily good for the company, but it's because he was hurt. He
Right.
felt shame. And that's how powerful it can be.
Wow.
That's part of the challenge with shame.
Wow.
And with shame, because our sense of self is being attacked, our worth is
Right.
being attacked, we'll go right into survival mode and we become self defensive, self protective, all of those things.
Wow.
And the other thing with shame is because we don't like feeling it, we'll actually even avoid situations that might possibly trigger it. So, for example, I should get feedback from people on how I am handling as a leader, but I don't necessarily like doing it because I might feel shame. So
Right.
we avoid doing the things that we need to help us grow. It
Right.
keeps us trapped
Yeah.
and it keeps us in hiddenness because we are deeply afraid that if people really knew me,
Mm. The
will
imposter
the
syndrome.
imposter syndrome, will they love us? Will they accept us? Will they
Yeah.
see me as incompetent? All
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
those things.
I'm just sitting here thinking, oh, wow. I think, reflecting back in my own life,
Hmm.
when I read the chapters on shame,
Mhm.
and I thought about being raised in a wonderful home, but a home it was about achieving and doing. And, two older
Mhm.
brothers, and
Mhm.
I had to keep up with them. And,
Yep.
I think for me, shame was if you're not doing good enough.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, there are other aspects too, but if you're not, do I measure up? I
Mhm.
share that in my own book, Found, as you know,
Mhm.
on
Mhm.
identity, because shame really is connected to your value and your
It
worth.
is. It is. It's really core to who we
Yeah.
think we are and our worth.
So
And
what
so,
would you suggest people do? Like, I know you have exercises in here,
mhm,
like in order to grow in this area of your life.
yeah.
So how do we grow in understanding our become more aware that that's a
Mhm.
shame trigger?
Right. We probably are experiencing shame at least once a day, if not more.
Oh,
So I
wow.
think part of it is paying attention to when we feel shame. And it could be something as silly as somebody cuts us off and we feel disrespected, and so we feel shame,
Okay.
to something more significant like, oh, I just had a fight with my kid. I'm such an awful parent, whatever.
Right.
So just even knowing when we feel shame, and
Yeah.
shame has a way of finding itself on its body. So for me, I know I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach,
Mm,
my throat tightens up,
right.
I get a flush that happens in my face. So
Interesting.
just being able to identify. And so what I ask people to do is just think about your day and think about the times that you felt icky.
Mm.
And icky is kind of one of those words. You might not be able to call it shame, but just identify when you feel
Hmm.
it. Because the thing about shame, it's like that thing that hides in the dark,
Yeah.
is when you bring it out to light, it dissipates. Because
Yeah.
the solution for shame is to be with people who love you, is to be able to bring it out to light and recognize that,
Yeah.
no, you are of great
Yeah.
worth. And yes, you might have made a mistake or you might have misjudged, but you are not the mistake.
Right.
And when you bring it out to light and you can be honest about your
Yeah.
shame, you have people who love you, including Jesus, who
Yeah.
help pull you out of that
Yeah.
shame tunnel.
Yeah. That is so true, Mary. And
Hmm.
I think that is the message of who God is. Like, he came to remind us of who we really are.
Yes.
And he wants us to know that. He doesn't want us to
Hmm.
carry. And I like you often talk on your podcast,
Hmm.
which I love, The Fully Lived Life. You talk about this inner critic. Do you think
Yes.
that's a sign of shame when we're criticizing ourselves?
Oh,
We have negative
absolutely.
self talk.
Absolutely. And
Mm.
in some ways, believe it or not, inner critic can be protective, because I'd rather criticize myself first before I hear it from anybody
Oh,
else.
wow.
And there's this belief that if I criticize myself, I'll just get better and better and better. But see, that's all performance. It's back to performance, people pleasing,
Right.
perfectionism. And all of that blocks us from discovering and rediscovering, rebecoming our essential
Yeah.
self,
Yeah.
because we're so busy spending all our energy trying to fight that,
Yeah.
that it becomes difficult to let our true self emerge.
It's so good. You in this section of the book, you on why we do what we do, because that's one whole section of the book.
Hmm.
You talk about the role of nature versus nurture. So tell us how they impact who we become.
Yes. Well, we are given a general, I mean, there's enough research now. Babies are born with a certain temperament, and you'll know this.
Yeah.
You've got 3 kids,
Yep.
you've got many grandkids,
Yep, I do.
and each one of them, you kind of go, oh, I can see their personality. Some of them are just more quiet, some of them
Yep.
are loud,
Pretty
some are
quick.
very active. So there's an inborn temperament that we have, but
Yeah.
then it's the experiences we have that put together start to form how we see ourselves, how we see others, how we see God, and then internal narrative that comes with that.
Yeah.
And so the combination is very, very significant if you don't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
So my sister and I were born in the same household. She's of a different temperament. She's older than I am. So our experiences, although we people say we were parented the same, we were not,
Right.
because of that interaction.
Yeah.
So with that combination, it is very important to see our story in that,
Yeah.
and to recognize that God has been part of that story. And although things that may have happened to us could be horribly painful and difficult, is to recognize that our story includes that in our
Mm.
growth through the painful moments, and who we become and
Right.
how we grow through that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
God uses it all, doesn't
He
he? And
does.
he knows what home he's placed us in. He knows geographically where we're going to live,
Hmm.
and he works through all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just love that. You know, just a final thought as we close today. I know tomorrow that we've got more coming, but what would you say to people? Maybe they've listened today and thought, oh, that's me. I feel that shame triggering or that fear coming.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I would encourage them by saying that that is something that we all struggle with.
Yeah.
That's why it's called a master emotion.
Yeah.
Please don't do it alone. It is finding that trusted circle of people. And if you don't have it, then a professional counselor, a therapist, pastor who's trained,
Yeah.
just somebody that you can be honest with about your struggles.
Yeah.
And when you do that and you receive empathy and acceptance, and you recognize that we have commonalities in our human struggles,
Yeah.
you can start to begin that road of healing from shame.
Yeah, it's so good. And thank you for being with us. And thank you for your book, Rebecoming, because this really, I'm telling you, you want cheap therapy? Here it is, right? Buy the book.
Yes.
Just kidding. But really, buy the book because it's just loaded with your years of experience and history and your compassion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Will you donate 2 hours of your time? Crossroads Prayer Center is seeking people with a heart willing to prepare Him room to join in the amazing work God is doing through prayer. Learn about becoming a Crossroads prayer partner today.
You know, at some point in our lives, we've all felt ashamed of something we said or did, right? It's that horrible feeling of remorse that you wish you could go and take back those words or have a do-over. You know, sometimes others put shame on us too with that ugly phrase, shame on you. Shame is a powerful influencer in our lives because it speaks to our value and worth as a person. When I was little, my friend and I thought we were just being funny by teasing one of the neighborhood kids until their parents started yelling at us, shame on you. You know, I felt like hiding in a hole, but there was no escape. Guilty as charged. And I felt so ashamed and humbly apologized never to tease that child again. So what's the difference between guilt and shame? Well, guilt says you did something bad. Shame says you are bad. See the difference? Guilt, in contrast, invites us to accept responsibility and take action, where shame makes us direct our focus inward and view our entire self negatively. Shame shows itself in unhealthy self-talk, or what some refer to as our inner critic. That voice in your head that says, you're dumb, or you're not smart enough, or you're not good enough, or you're that bad person. Shame holds us back, and often it shuts us down, so we can't act. We can't actually take responsibility, and we can't make amends. I was so relieved when I could say I was sorry to my friend and her mom. See, guilt allowed me to say sorry. Shame would have told me I'm a bad kid and always will be. And shame is not our friend. But this may come as a surprise. Guilt is. When we're guilty of an offense, we can take responsibility and make amends. When I took responsibility for my actions, my friend and her mom forgave me, freeing me of shame. Although I did a bad thing, I was not a bad person. See the difference? That's what forgiveness does. It frees us of shame. You know, the beautiful thing about the gospel is that when we were guilty as charged, God took responsibility and made amends for us. Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, guilty, Christ died for us. See, Jesus took our sins on Himself. He took responsibility for it. Why then can we have so much shame, you might ask? Well, I believe it's because we don't really understand the power of what Jesus did for us. He died for us. He took responsibility for our sins. He made amends. Jesus removed our guilt, and He wants us to live free of shame. Colossians 2 verse 14 says, Jesus, He canceled the record of the charges against us, guilty as charged, and He took it away by nailing it to the cross. So have you accepted this free gift of forgiveness from Jesus to remove your guilt? If you have, then no more shame on you. You do not need to live guilty any longer. You are set free from it. So there's no room for shame. God loves you and sees you as sinless when you admit your guilt and receive His forgiveness. He washes you clean. No more shame on you. So are you living with guilt over something you've done? Well, confess it, admit to it, and receive God's forgiveness. And if possible, Go and make amends. But do not carry shame around any longer. Shame does not belong to God's children. Tell shame to leave and start living out of how God sees you. You're loved, you are forgiven, you are pure and cleansed and set free because that's who you really are.
Hi there, my name's Ryan, and I played a little bit in the NHL. I played a lot on teams, almost 60 years on teams. A guy by the name of Jim Wilder enlightened me recently. He said there's 3 types of players on your team. Every team, church team, business team, every team. Number 1, you got possums. And when things don't go well, possums play dead. Number 2, you have predators. Predators go after the possums. They're looking for the edge. Number 3 is you have protectors. And every team that I can look back on, if we had more protectors than we had predators, that was a different team. Here's my point. Jesus is the good shepherd. He's the ultimate protector. Are we growing towards being a protector? Are we growing towards being a predator? Or are we still a possum?
Well, what a journey we're on this week. I mean, I learned so much again today from Dr. Mary in her book, Rebecoming. I mean, did you hear the message loud and clear? Like, no shame on you. You know, we're not to live under fear and shame. We can actually be freed of that so that we can live out of our true, essential, God-given self. I love the tagline of this book, come out of hiding to live as your God-given essential self. Do you need to come out of hiding? Do you need to shed some shame or get rid of some fear in your life or things that are holding you back from being all who God created you to be? I want you to get this book. Go wherever books are sold and look up Rebecoming, Dr. Mary Lynn, and get it for yourself and get it for some other people in your life that need to come into their true God-given self. Well, I want to invite you today and remind you that God loves you. And you have an opportunity to respond to his love, to respond to his invitation. He doesn't come here and say, shame on you and, you know, you're no good. He comes and says, I love you and I love you so much that I came to die for you. I came to show you what it means to live free. That's what Jesus did. Jesus showed us what it means to actually live in his full God-given self as an image bearer and essence of God. And he was God himself, but he says, will you reflect me in your life? And I want you to experience freedom, but you can only experience freedom and really finding your true self by going to the one who made you. So why don't you say yes today, yes to Jesus. Say, thank you for dying for me. Come and lead my life. And we'd love to pray for you. Call us at 1-855-910-6297. We have trusted prayer partners on the line ready to talk to you right now. So don't hesitate. Give us a call. Welcome the Lord Jesus to love you first and foremost and to set you free from any shame. He's paid the price for your guilt, and he wants you to live in your true, authentic, essential self because that's what you were made for. I'll see you tomorrow on The Perspective.